For almost a decade, a shadow just hung over Canada's biggest city. Men were disappearing, just vanishing, it seemed, into thin air. They left behind families, friends, and a whole community gripped by questions that just had no answers. This is the story of how that mystery unraveled into one of the most complex and just heart-wrenching criminal investigations in the country's history.
Okay, so let's start at the very beginning. And the thing is, the beginning was deceptively quiet. In 2010, one man vanishes. Then, nothing for a while. It wasn't some sudden spree, and that's exactly what makes it so unnerving. Over 7 long years, that number slowly grew. 8 men, each with his own life, his own story, a future, and now all of them are connected by this single tragic fate. I mean, think about that time frame, 7 years. That's almost a decade of fear just building and building right under the surface.
And that, right there, leads us to the most chilling question of all. In a huge modern city like Toronto, how on earth does a killer manage to operate, totally undetected, for the better part of a decade? To even start to answer that, we really need to meet the man who was hiding in plain sight the entire time.
His name is Bruce McArthur, and to most people, he was just a self-employed landscaper. A familiar face around the community, working in people's yards, just an ordinary part of the city's fabric. But behind that public facade was a secret that was absolutely horrifying.
So let's turn our attention to the men themselves, because this is where the pattern really starts to become clear. These weren't random acts of violence happening all across the city. No, the disappearances were concentrated. They were centered around one specific community, and that created this unique and just terrifying kind of alarm.
What's really revealing when you look at this slide is the timeline itself. Just look at those gaps. 2 full years between the first and second victim, almost 3 years before the third. This wasn't a frenzy, this was calculated. These long, quiet periods, they created a false sense of security, and it made it incredibly difficult for investigators and for the community to connect the dots.
It is so important that we don't just see them as a number. They were individuals. So let's just take a moment here to honor their names. Skandaraj Nawaratnam, Abdul Basir Faizi, Majid Kaihan, Soroush Mahmoudi, Dean Lisowick, Selim Essen, Andrew Kinsman, and Kirushna Kumar Kanagaratnam. 8 men, 8 lives, and every single one was stolen.
As the disappearances kept happening, especially within Toronto's LGBTQ community in the Church and Wellesley neighborhood, so did the fear. The official answers were few and far between, but online, in forums and on social media, people were starting to ask the really hard questions, and they were starting to connect the dots themselves.
And this slide right here shows you just how early those concerns were being voiced. This is a forum post from 2013. That's 5 years before the arrest. Online communities were already making the connections, pointing out the multiple men had vanished from the very same small neighborhood. It's a really stark example of the community seeing the smoke long before officials would even acknowledge there was a fire. So for almost a decade, this cloud of just pure uncertainty hung over the city. Every time a new missing person report came out, it sparked that same terrifying question. Had it happened again? It was a period defined by fear and just this desperate search for answers that simply were not coming.
And then, just like that, everything changed. After years of investigative work, of different task forces, and of mounting public pressure, there was finally a breakthrough. That long, agonizing wait for an answer, it was finally coming to an end.
And right here, the speculation ends. The horrifying truth is finally confirmed. Bruce McArthur, the landscaper, admitted his guilt. There was no trial, there was no doubt left, just a confession that finally solved the awful mystery of the vanishing men.
And it all came down to this one absolutely devastating number: 8. He pleaded guilty to 8 counts of first-degree murder. That's the most serious charge possible for every single man he took. And it's really important to understand what that actually means. First-degree murder is not a crime of passion, it's not some spur-of-the-moment act. By its very definition, it is planned and it is deliberate. This speaks to the calculated nature of these crimes and the cold premeditation that was involved over so many years.
But a guilty plea, well, that doesn't erase the trauma. The end of the criminal case was really just the beginning of a long process of healing and reckoning for the city of Toronto, and especially for the communities that were so deeply affected by these crimes.
This quote from the Toronto police themselves really puts the entire saga into perspective. This wasn't just another homicide case. In their own words, this was something the city had never seen before. A case on a scale that was going to leave a permanent scar.
And so this whole case leaves us with a vital question. When a community sees danger and it raises the alarm, how do we as a society make sure they are heard? The story of Bruce McArthur is a tragic reminder of what happens when vulnerable people are allowed to slip through the cracks. The challenge for all of us now is to learn from this, and in doing so, to honor the 8 men who were lost.